When it comes to new homes in Texas particularly, there's a couple things that you need to be aware of if you're planning on buying or building with a builder. Some of the biggest things to be mindful of is these contracts are a little bit different. In the biggest case being that in a normal, well, I call it normal, let's call it a resale real estate transaction. So let's say you go out and you're looking at a home that's on the market and it's an individual selling it. Those deals or those sales have regulations put in place by the Texas Real Estate Commission, or TREC. There's a for the most part, if you're using a realtor on both sides, there's a very specific contract that's used. There's all of these different things that are written out and that are understood. When you buy new construction, that is not necessarily the case. So today, I want to talk you through some of the things to potentially look out for, whether you're building with a builder or buying from a builder's inventory. Make sure you understand these things in your contract, because if you don't, you might be in a little bit of trouble. If we haven't met before, my name is Zach. My team and I, we focus on selling new construction real estate here in the DFW market. So whether you're building or buying from a builder's inventory, whether you're here or you're relocating into our market, we'd love to help you in any way that we can. And one of the ways that we do is putting out resources like this to kind of talk through what you should expect when looking at builder contracts. So, like I said at the beginning, Texas Real Estate, or TREC, regulates resale real estate here in Texas. So we have very specific realtor contracts. You know, they're 1 to 4. We could walk through those, all the details. When it comes to buying from a builder, that is not the case. Builders are not regulated by TREC. For the most part, you probably didn't know this, for the most part, the salesperson that sits in a builder's office, they are not a licensed real estate agent. They are an employee of that builder or an employee of that company. They're paid on a commission, or they're 1099, but they are not a licensed real estate agent. So they do not have to follow the same rules and regulations. They do not have the same fiduciary duty. Like I said, they are a trained salesperson, but they are not a licensed real estate agent, and that's super important. So when it comes to looking at these builders' contracts, all of them are different. I mean, they have some very similar language and clauses and things like that in them, but they're all different because they're all written by each individual builder's company and their attorneys. And just right off the jump, I want to tell you, for the most part, that contract is written to protect the builder, not necessarily protect you, the buyer. That's the case with the majority of new construction contracts. Doesn't make it bad, it just makes it something that you need to be aware of, that it is written for the most part to protect the builder, not to protect you. Second thing I want to tell you is majority of builders, 95% of them, if there's something in the contract that you don't like, they're not going to give you the option to just like scratch it out. And I, as your real estate agent, or our team, we're not going to scratch something out because we're not attorneys. That's not what we do. So for the most part, a builder can say, well, if you don't like it, we're sorry. You can move on and we'll sell it to somebody else. Because if they started letting one person scratch something out in their contracts, they would have to let everybody do that. So it's not going to happen. So again, this is to help you be prepared. I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy from a builder. Again, I do a lot of business with various builders. I think they put some really good products out, and I think there's some of the best benefits right now when it comes to buying. But when you do that, you just need to be aware of things that you should look out for in that contract. So let's get into it and talk about a couple things that I think you should probably be aware of when it comes to buying from a builder in terms of their contract. Number one, I think the first thing to be aware of is the deposit amounts and the due dates. And so this is both true whether you're buying from their inventory or you're buying from the building from the ground up. You're going to have two different sets of deposits. So let's do the inventory one first. So on an inventory home, this is a home that is either completed or almost completed, within probably the next 45 to 60 days, maybe a little bit longer. Typically on that one, you're going to have one earnest money deposit. This number varies by builder and it varies by community. Sometimes it's a flat, $5,000, $7,000. Sometimes it's a percentage, 1 to 2%. Sometimes it includes, if there's a lot, like if you're buying a corner lot and there's a premium, sometimes there's a piece of that. It's all variable, but you will make one deposit on, and most of the time on an inventory build job. That deposit will be credited to you at closing, so it's what secures the contract. If for some reason you don't close, there's language in that contract that talks about what happens to that deposit. That'll be our next one. But just confirm and understand the deposit amounts and the due dates. So that's on the inventory side. Same thing on the build side. You're probably going to have a couple of extra deposits. Usually when it comes to a build, a lot of builders charge an upfront deposit on the front side, and it's usually similar to the inventory, percentage of base price or flat fee, and then percentage of lot premium for some of those builders. And then there's an additional deposit after you get through the design selections, and the builders will charge anything from 25% of design selections to 50% of design selections to, I've seen a lot of builders here recently that are doing percentage over a certain amount. So for example, if they tell you, hey, you have a $25,000 incentive for your design, and then you're gonna give us a deposit of 50% of anything over that $25,000. So let's say you go to the design center, and you spend $35,000. So you went $10,000 over. They want 50% of the 10 over, so it's an additional $5,000 in the deposit. That'll be very clearly lined out in your contract as to when those deposits are due and what happens when you pay those deposits and how much they're going to be. This is one of those things where I would tell you work with your sales agent and work with your realtor to kind of process and navigate these things, because they are negotiable. For a lot of builders, they are negotiable. And so we can just kind of work through that process. Realistically, it's the corporate, it's not the individual office person, it's more their boss. They're wanting skin in the game as they're continuing to build out your home. And especially if you go in and you make some selections that are very unique, and that would be a difficulty for them to resell it. If you did not close on this home, they're probably going to expect some higher deposits. So just make sure you know, hey, when your deposits are due, how much they are they negotiable, and how are they credited? Secondarily, what happens to those deposits if you don't close? So all of the builders have language in their contracts that talk about what happens if you as a buyer choose not to close, how much of your deposit is refundable, if it's refundable at all, if it's not. And again, there are very specific language and circumstances, so make sure you read and understand that, because you're potentially putting a lot of money on the table. And what I don't want you to do is get to a place where you're losing that money. I have seen builders in the past to where they've said, hey, somebody backs out on a contract and they can't close. And what they'll do is they'll say, hey, we're going to hold this as a credit for up to a year. And they'll say, hey, you could come back to any of our communities across DFW and you have this, $10,000 credit that you can use up to a year from when we terminate the contract. That's not the case across the board. So just make sure you look at that language in there about deposits, when they're due, and if they're refundable or if they are not. Second one, in line with this sort of thing, is asking about what changes and what change orders are allowed to happen with your home. Again, both on an inventory and on a build. At a certain point, especially on the build job, at a certain point, you're going to hit a state where you can no longer make changes to the design, to the structure, because materials have been ordered. Or what they're going to tell you is, hey, we'll do that change, but it's going to be a $500 change fee plus a $350 redesign plus the cost of any material changes, right? So they'll do them, but they're going to make it difficult for you to do that. So just make sure you're aware of when those change deadlines are and if there are changes allowed. The other thing to be aware of is there's always going to be language most of the time in the builder's contract that talks about what happens if materials are no longer available. So let's say, for example, you pick a very specific brick that you want to put on your home, and then the builder comes back and says, hey, we are out of stock on that brick. We can't get it. We've been delayed, for whatever reason. There's language in there that talks about, well, what happens. And usually the language centers something around, well, hey, a reselection needs to be done. They're not going to charge you the change fee because it's out of your control, but they're also not going to let you delay indefinitely because a product is out of stock. So a reselection needs to be done. Usually they'll let you pick, but sometimes they may pick for you, and you'll just kind of be notified that it was subject to change without notice. So that's language that's in there too. So just make sure you are okay with that. And if something happens or something's not available, there might be a change. There might be a shift in materials. There might be a shift, whatever it is. A good salesperson, they should be able to communicate to you if that happens, but there is language in there that talks about that kind of situation. Third one, you're going to get language in your contract based on what their warranty looks like. So this is where you're asking questions. Hey, what is your warranty covered? Is it a third party? Like, do you use a company? Do you service it yourself? Is it transferable? Majority of builders right now operate, a few of them still operate on like a 1-2-10 policy. So 1 year on more or less cosmetic things within the home. Now, if you go tripping and falling and, hitting your head and knocking a hole in your drywall, that's probably not going to be covered. But like other cosmetic things that weren't intentionally caused, that should be covered in your warranty. 2 years on anything system, so think HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and 10 on structure and foundation. Now, this is the important part to know, because the laws changed in Texas in 2023. Builders are not required to hold a 10-year warranty on that structure and foundation anymore. They're only technically required by Texas law to hold up to a 6-year warranty. So we've seen a few builders pull back on their warranties, and they're saying, hey, we're doing 126s, and there are still quite a few, honestly, that are honoring it, saying, nope, we believe in our product, we're doing 1210s. There's a couple that do 2210s. So just know what that language looks like in terms of warranty, what's covered, how they cover it, what that process looks like. It's going to be in the contract of what they do warranty and what they don't warranty. Most of the time you'll see in there that, like, hey, trees and sod are not warranted items because they can't control that. So ask those questions, read through your contract. Again, all of this is not designed for you to say, oh, I'm going to take a pin to it and cross through it. It's just designed to say, hey, we need to understand what it is we're signing. And what it is that's in there. And of course, as always, if you have questions, I always tell people you are more than welcome to hire an attorney to have them walk you through anything in your contract. It's probably not going to change, just being transparent with you, but you always have the rights to hire an attorney to ask any major legal questions when it comes to those builder contracts. Now, I hit this earlier briefly, but talk about the termination. What happens if you can't close? What happens if the builder can't close? How does the money get split? Is there a fee that's paid back to you? Is there a fee that's paid to them minus the earnest money? Like, all of that'll be language that's in there too. So understand what happens if you terminate. Also, on the same line, understand what happens and the cost of not being able to close on time. So let's say your home is ready on September 4th and the builder says, okay, we're closing, it's September 4th, and you're like, I'm not ready to close. Well, there's going to be language in there that says, hey, we will hold the house for up to X amount of days, and then we're going to start charging you a fee, and it's usually a per day fee for every day that you can't close, and they have the right to call on that fee if you can't. So it's like, oh, it's September 4th and we're not ready, we can't close till the end of the month. Honestly, there's a good chance they're going to start charging you fees. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise. When closing is coming. Like, everybody should be communicating and be on the same page. Sometimes it doesn't happen. It's just kind of the way it goes. But when those things happen, like if you can't, there's usually, like, if you delay and they're having to carry the holding cost, there is going to be some sort of fee charged to you for that delay. Now, on the flip side, you'd probably be asking as a buyer, well, what happens if they don't meet the deadline and expectation? Like, do I get to charge them a fee? No, you do not. Again, it's written for their protection, not yours. They're the one building the asset. They're the one taking on the risk. So there's not going to be like a reverse Uno card where they're like, oh, if we miss our deadline, we'll start paying you money. That does not happen. Along the same lines of your money and your finances, there will be language in these contracts based on escalation clauses and what happens in price change situations if materials go up. So we saw this a lot through COVID 2021, 22, where builders were having, like, markets were fluctuating so much on lumber and labor and brick, and everything was like, and people were taking crazy price hikes. So builders now have language in their contracts based on price escalations. Here's what I will tell you on that. In the last 2 years, I have seen 0 price escalations in any deal that we have done in a new construction space. 0. No, and we've done tons of them. So no price escalations. There will still be language in there about that, but most builders now, when whatever the contract price is, that is the price that you end up paying. They're not coming back and raising prices on you. Also means whatever incentives you got may not be the same incentives that your neighbor got, depending on when they contracted, depending on how they negotiated, depending on the deal that they got. Incentives may be a little bit different, pricing may be a little bit different. So all of that will be lined out in your contract, and you don't get to be like, oh, hey, if this month we got a $20,000 deal, but next month they're doing a $30,000 deal. Like, you most likely, you're not going to be able to go back to the builder and be like, hey, can we return this? Can we get a better deal? They're going to say no. They're not going to rewrite. They're not going to cancel the contract, come back and rewrite it to give you that better deal. It's just not the way that tend to do business. As we talk about incentives, you will probably see those lined out in a couple of different spaces. Usually, so if you're building, like you're going ground up, you're going to have, a lot of times you'll have a design or structural incentive, and then you'll have a finance incentive. Occasionally, what builders are doing now is they're pairing those together, and they're like, it's a lump sum pool and saying you have up to this amount of money to spend however much you want. Some builders are doing that. Some are still keeping it separate. Some are changing it based on the season. It just depends. So you'll see those clearly lined out in your contract. Also ask the question of how much of that incentive is tied to in-house lending. So if they tell you you have $20,000 in closing costs, is that 20 tied to using their lender? And I will tell you, most of the time, at least part of it or a good chunk of it is. So what you'll see, so for example, let's take Highland. Highland says, hey, there's, whatever the number is, let's call it $20,000 in closing cost. And really what you'll see in your contract is it'll say there's $11,000 coming from Highland Homes, and then another $9,000 is tied to Highland Home Lending. So if you leave Highland Home Lending and you go to, I don't know, Navy Federal or whoever, and they're like, okay, well, you just lost the 9, but we'll still give you 11. And every builder is going to be different on how much of their closing incentives are tied to their in-house lending. Some of them do a lot of it, some of them don't do any of it. It just very much depends, but majority of them do something, especially if they're giving you some sort of, like, then this is more true on an inventory deal, not a build, because on builds, you usually get some sort of flex cash. On inventory is where you start to see those rate promos, like the 4.75 or the 3.99 or the 2-1 buy down. Like, you'll see those a lot on inventory deals, and that'll be very explicitly lined out in your contract as well, because those are done through their in-house lending teams, and they can't carry that rate to the outside because of how they purchase those rates. So just know where that money is and how it can be spent. Majority of the time, I will say, I do think most of my clients end up staying with the in-house lending. We've had a couple that have shopped it and gotten better rates on some very, very specific deals. But for the most part, I think we've had people stay with in-house lending. It just seems to make the process flow a little bit cleaner. Like, their systems, they all talk to each other. They're all integrated, so it makes it easier getting documents out and getting signatures. It also makes it easier on funding and closing and make sure you get your keys. So either way, just know that there's going to be language in there that ties up that in how that incentive can be spent. When it comes to closing, also there will be language about appraisals and what happens if your home does not make appraised value. Let's say you've spent $600 and it appraises at $590. There's language going to be in that contract on what happens on the appraisal and where the shortages are, how that gets made up. Make sure you read and understand that. Make sure you read and understand the MUD or PID riders. If you're buying in a MUD or a PID, those will be in the builder contracts. It'll talk through how much it is, how much it adds to your taxes. It doesn't mean you're going to get to go away from it. Just know that it's in there, read through it, understand it. And probably the last, there's a number of other things that we could talk through. And I always as we're getting ready to work through contracts with builders, we want to sit down and talk through it. Usually sales reps are really great about walking us through that. I can sit down and, part of my job is to help walk you through that and explain and answer any questions that you have in terms of what's in that contract. But the last one that I would give you, that's probably one of the biggest ones, and I'm having this experience with a couple of different clients right now, so I want to talk about it, is when they write this contract, particularly on a build. So on an inventory, they can usually guess a little bit better, but particularly on a build, the contract's going to have some sort of date written in it. And what they're going to do is they're going to go arbitrary, out 5, 6, 7 months. Say, oh, this is the date we think it's going to be. It's a educated wish. Movie reference. It was an educated wish that they were going to hit that date. And so what's happening now is construction times are actually speeding up. And so we're getting in front of those dates, right? And so I have a couple clients right now that we've kind of been navigating this of, hey, the builder said this in the contract, and now we're a month early. And it was kind of a shock, just to be honest. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. We're not ready to do that. So know that date is not written anywhere in concrete. It is a educated guess, wish type thing, that they'll hit it. Now, we obviously don't want them going too far past it, but getting way out in front of it. Hopefully they're doing their job communicating, and we're staying on top of things, and we know when those things are happening. But that date at the time of contract is a guess. Realistically, once we start seeing your kitchen countertops and cabinets and flooring go in, that's when they can start solidifying those dates. And so here's where it gets hard, is from a corporate standpoint. Again, all of these are businesses. When those dates start hitting, calendars and clocks, it ramps things up, and they got to start moving. Builders get pressure put on them to get homes done. Salespeople get pressure to get the homes cleared and sold. There's a lot of moving pieces that happen, and sometimes they do get ahead of schedule. So just know that date is probably going to fluctuate. If you're buying an inventory home and the home is completed, like everything is done, you just got to do the walkthroughs and the inspections, which, speaking of, do the inspections. I always tell you, ask about that, third-party inspections, see what the language is like in the contract. Please do that. Back to what we're talking. If you're buying an inventory home and it's pretty close to done and you've just got to do inspections and walkthroughs, that date is probably relatively solid. Like, you can depend on that a little bit more. If you're buying in an inventory home that's being built, like it's like, oh, hey, we just started framing it and they think it's going to be ready in 3 or 4 months, that date is in concrete that's drying. Like it's close, but it ain't super close. And if you're buying from dirt up, pencil the date in and give yourself 30 days on either side. Just being quite frankly honest, the best I know how. Pencil the date in and add 30 days one way or the other, because it's probably going to fluctuate. So yeah, if your inventory, probably pretty hard concrete. Inventory that's started, wet concrete. Inventory that are build, not so much. So those are all the different things. If you have questions or you need to talk through a contract, and we would love to just kind of sit down with you and do that. Of course, ultimately, we'd love to help you buy your next home. So if we can help with that in any way, our contact information is right there. There's a lot changing in the market. There is a lot going on here in DFW. There's a lot of builders that have really great deals and really great incentives right now. And we would love to help get you connected with those things, and of course answer any questions along the way. So here for you to make this make as much sense as we possibly can, and we'll figure it out together. So thanks for your time. Hope this was helpful. We will see you guys in our next video. And of course, if you have questions, leave them in the comments down below. We try and get to those and love hanging out with you. So bye for now, and we'll see y'all next time.